Welcome everyone. Hi, I know I can't see you, but I know you can see me, or I hope you can see me. So if you've got the chat room there, the chat box there that you can open up, you're quite welcome to say hello to everyone. Introduce yourself if you haven't already, if this is the first time you've been on one of these, or the first time you're coming into this group. So we're using webinar mode, which means your cameras are turned off. It also means your microphones are turned off. And that's just so that we can do more of a presentation with a slide deck that gives you some more of the content. But that doesn't mean you can't interact. So there is at the bottom of your screen, you should have, or maybe it's the top of yours, you should have some functionality buttons. And one of those will be a chat box that you can open up. You can resize that to something a bit smaller, just sitting off the side, or you can just open it up and close it down as you want to make a comment. So leave that to you. We also have a Q&A option. So in the Q&A option, I'd really like this time, as we go through the content, if you think of a question that you'd really like to ask as we get to the end of this, Gary's going to ask those questions. He's looking at the chat box and the Q&A as we go. So when we get to the end, if you've got some questions, it's really good to sort of perhaps put them in as we go rather than quickly having to type in at the end. So I'd love to see some questions. That's another way that we can interact using this format. So I'm just checking that everyone can see me. It's all hearing me great. Put that in the chat box if you have any issues with sound or any issues with this not coming through the way it needs to be. If you put that in there, Gary can see that and he can perhaps contact you on the side. All right, let's get into it. We are in the midst of a massive march. In fact, I call it kind of like a momentously massive march. And it's because there's a whole heap of things just going on at the moment. I don't know about you, but for me, when a new year starts, it feels like you kind of ease into February and then suddenly March hits you between the eyes and there's so much going on. And particularly for women, and particularly in the kind of atmosphere that we're in at the moment, we have Queensland Women's Week, which kicked off a couple of days ago, and it runs actually for 10 days, not a week. And then there's International Women's Day right smack in the middle of that on Monday the 8th. So some of you I know are involved in that. And I do want to say some of you are actually will be listening to this later in the recording because you're already involved in some things that are going on today for International Women's Day and Queensland Women's Week celebrations. So we have that. We also have a lot of women right at the moment around Australia rising up in disgust with some of the ways women are being treated currently across a number of issues. And that adds another level, if you like, of angst or stress for a number of people. So just being mindful of everything that's going on for you. We do have a full month in a full program, if you like, in our second module or our second month of this program. And we're very mindful of that. We have the addition of a panel session, and I'll talk about that at the end. We have an additional thing that we need you to do, which is to fill out your SEEP assessment halfway through. You'll get an email about that. It only takes about 20 minutes, but we do recognise that's an additional element that you need to do this month so we can organise your coaching for the following month. And we do have our first and additional, it is optional, open forum, which we'll be holding at the end of the month, which is more of an open thing where you can see everyone on Zoom and more casual and you can ask your questions, you know, and work with each other on that. So it is a great month. It is a massive month, and it is one that by telling you all that, I certainly don't want to kick you straight into overwhelm when we're about to do a webinar on resilience. But just know that I do know what overwhelm is, and Gary will actually vouch for that as well. So we all need these kind of lessons or reminders. So in talking about resilience and module 2, as I was doing the last minute kind of tweaks and updates just before we loaded everything onto the online platform, I had many aha moments myself. Those gentle kind of, you know, slap in the head kind of reminders, you know, Jalinda, you need a good dose of this yourself, you know. And it's really good when you're working on some of that and reading some of the material to take your own lessons out of that as you're going. So my message to you today is let's work on resilience refueling together today, because at some point in our lives, we all end up with a bucket that's way too low. So let's have a look at resilience and what it is. This is about as textbooky as I get around this, but resilience and the definition of resilience is the traditional definition, if you like, is perseverance and diligence in the face of setbacks. So if you look it up in the usual dictionaries, that's what you'll find. And yes, that's true. It is about rising up and it is about acknowledging that there are setbacks. But I found this a couple of years ago, this modern definition of resilience, and I rather like it. It's actually advancing despite adversity. It's just a really simple way of stating, what that is, which is still advancing, still going forward, still doing the things that you want to do in line with your goals, in line with your vision, despite the fact that you know that at times along the way there will be some sort of adversities. And so it's also about, in that despite area, being proactive, like that there will be things, perhaps doing a bit of a risk assessment, understanding that when I go down this path, I'm probably going to come up with a couple of hurdles, and almost putting things in place to mitigate that, and don't wait for adversity to sort of, hit you between the eyes. Of course, we can't always plan that, but it's good to have a good reality, if you like, around the fact and acknowledgement around the fact that there will be some adversities that happen along the way, or challenges, if you like. Also, around adversity, keep in mind that adversity can be little tiny things, that chip away at everyday stuff. And then it can be the really big stuff like we've been dealing with COVID, for instance. So it's all types of adversity that can really kind of, suck our resilience bucket dry at times or push it down a bit lower, and we need to be building that up. I mentioned challenges before, and people think, oh, another challenge, we sort of put a real negative thing around that. But if you think of a life that has absolutely no challenges, I really think you'd be thinking, how boring would that be if everything was just exactly the same and you plodded along like a robot with no challenges, no changes in your life. So challenges are what make life interesting. It actually is also what makes us grow. And so overcoming those challenges, we learn things from that and we grow from them. And that's what makes life meaningful. And then as we rise up from a couple of challenges and as we sort of go through life and have more and more experiences and challenges, we become wiser for them with much more determination and more resolve, more grit, if you like. And that's what makes our life successful. So perhaps sometimes we've got to look at what are we telling ourselves around challenges, and are we looking sometimes for some things that's more challenging when we get stuck in a rut. Just going to what resilient isn't, and I did mention this in my intro video for this module. Resilience has nothing to do with mixing sand, gravel and water and taking a spoonful of cement. It's got nothing to do with hardening up or being tough as nails or building a protective wall around you so that you can't kind of, experience anything that's negative. Nothing can penetrate. Because avoidance is not the answer. In fact, avoidance is the enemy of resilience and growth. So resilience has nothing to do with removing the emotions out of your life. And we'll do more on emotional intelligence next month. It's got nothing to do with not feeling the highs and lows or the stresses or the negative stuff, because we learn from all of that. And how can you be agile and flexible and open to new experiences and passionately driving your purpose in all that you do if you actually avoid and self-protect and kind of go sit in the corner? So it is important to understand what resilience is not. Let's look at what it is. Let's look at what does it look like? What does it feel like when people have got high resilient levels? How do they look and act? Well, firstly, they tend to be the sort of people that commit to goals. They have a vision, they have goals, and they commit to them. They also tend to be the type of person who will focus more on what they can control. So where they put their energy levels, if you like, is around the things they can control, because there's so much in life we can't control, and worrying about those things just sucks our energy. So, and then, you know, drops our resilience levels. So focusing on what they can control and really sort of honing in on that so that they have some wins. They also don't blame themselves when things go wrong. You kind of look at the, you know, the holistic picture of, you know, stuff happens rather than going, oh, I'm bad. So they tend not to blame themselves. And they are empathetic. Now, in empathy, it's kind of empathetic towards yourself, your self needs, the things that you need to build, and also the things that impact on you negatively. So really strong understanding of the flow-on effects of things in yourself, and also with those significant people around them. So they tend to be more empathetic. They tend to think more positively. And there's a number of things we're doing in our module this month that's about our mindset, our resilient mindset, and building more positivity around that. So they tend to have more of that, you know, glass half full or let's fill up the glass attitude rather than glass half empty. And they also tend to see the challenges, and by see, they don't kind of avoid them. They actually see the challenges, and in some cases, you know, they'll be reaching out for some of those challenges, knowing that that's giving them the growth. So that's why, you know, that's what it looks like, and that's why it's really important to understand why you need to build your resilience levels. Now, the how-to around that. I have this, and this is not mine, but it's one that I came up with, came across a couple of, actually probably last year, beginning of last year, and I thought it really nailed it well around the 5-point formula of how to build your resilience. I'm just going to run through each one, but at the end, I'm actually wanting you, as we're going through this, to have a think about which one of these is your strongest and which one of these is your weakest areas in building your resilience. So emotional intelligence, as the first one, is actually about, you know, a self-management area of the emotional intelligence area, the competencies that we deal with. So when we do emotional intelligence next month, we look at self-awareness, and we've done a lot of that already in module 1 and module 2. And then we look at self-management. So it's around how we manage our resilience levels, our stress, and our agility. So that kind of, you know, approach of being able to do those things well rather than those things taking over on us and us not having a level of control over our emotions around that. So that's important. It's also about energy management, and I have spoken on this a little bit already. It's important to understand where our strengths are. When we did that strengths exercise in module 1, we talked about what, you know, builds our energy, what fuels our energy, and that's the sort of things that strengthen us. Well, this is about managing it from a health priority point of view or health balance point of view, our priorities around our energy levels, and working on things that just energize you, not stuff that sucks you dry. Then we have connections, and we're, you know, social animals. We're social beings. We have a need to socialize to some extent, to have a feeling of belonging or fitting in, or at least being valued by others for the stuff that we do, and connect with other like-minded people. And that helps to build our resilience levels as well. A lot of people will tell you that with the lack of connection or less connection during COVID, for instance, that really was the bit that, you know, tended to make them feel less resilient. That was the bit that kind of drained them. And so we do need that kind of level of connections. And some of us need to rebuild that, me included, because I do everything online these days. Perspective. Perspective is about a realistic view or a broader understanding of the whole situation. And it's actually about a perspective of what's going on now, so in the moment, the present, as well as a good broader perspective of the future flow-on impacts. So it's having a really realistic perspective, if you like. And the last one there, the fifth one, is stuff that we did in module 1. It's purpose, values, and strengths. So all those inner core things we reflected on and strengthened in module 1, right? So if you look at those, there's 5 elements there. And I've just given you a quick run through, but I'm curious, and Gary's going to put up a poll now. And there'll be the 5 areas that you can choose which ones or one is your strongest. Which one do you think is your strongest resilience factor? And which one do you think is your weakest resilience factor? So I can see the polls come up now. We'll leave that there for a few minutes. Just pop in and do that for us. That would be really wonderful. Just click on one that you think is your strongest and your weakest. By the way, this is totally anonymous. We don't have names coming through with this. We're just curious. And at the end of this webinar, we'll actually share what the collective view is on that, or, you know, who's basically where's our weakest areas and where's our strongest. So I'll leave that just for a couple more seconds and we'll go on to the next slide. You going okay with that? Need any more time? Resilience is one of those things, isn't it? We don't often break it down into the 5 areas. We often think of it as just one bucket, but it has a number of components, and it's good to look at the things that perhaps we need to do more on to build that resilience back up. Thank you for being patient. So I want to actually look at our resilient mindset. And you've got this in your workbook in a slightly larger list. There are things that chip away at our resilience, and it's often the things that we think about. It's our thinking patterns. So when we start to look at how to make sure our resilience stays, you know, nice and strong, it's a really good idea to look at our mindset. So things like, as we've got here, things like filtering. Filtering is about, you know, we tend to magnify the negatives, as it says here, and filter out the positives. We're actually hardwired to go to that negative space first. So we're more inclined to go there, and then we've got to look at, hang on, we're not seeing what else could happen here, what some of the good things can happen. So there's that filtering. One of the things I see quite often in the sector that we're in is polarizing, like things are either right or wrong, black or white, good and bad, or it's either a huge success or an absolute failure. So just looking at where, you know, things in life are a lot more, you know, grey areas in between and flowing, and perhaps interim things are happening, that we can't always say that things are black and white. Overgeneralizing is another. I won't go through all of them because you will do this in your workbook, but I do want you to have a good think about which ones of these, and we're not doing another poll at this point, but you've got it in your workbook. Which ones of these are things that you often go to and you think, yeah, and every time I do that, that chips away at my thinking, my resilient mindset. I particularly want you to think about the catastrophizing one there, because catastrophizing is about one small thing that happens. And then suddenly you go, oh my gosh, if that happens, then this will probably happen too. And then after that, there'll be this. And oh my gosh, by the end of the month, it'll look like, you know, and so we start to kind of really catastrophize over something that's just one small issue that perhaps you could deal with and it's gone. So watch that one. That's a very common one. Another thing that's in our module this month is a great little video to watch, as well as a section in your workbook on this. I love this guy. This is kind of like your bullshit voice, if you like, or, you know, what we call the evil DJ, or the correct terminology is your, you know, your inner critic. And as I said before, we tend to be fairly hardwired to go to that negative area. And quite often when we do, we have particular soundtracks or particular phrases that just pop into our head straight away. And it tends to be the thing that plays over and over again every time that kind of thing happens, for instance. And that's because the amygdala section of our brain is the first thing that lights up. So when we sort of see something negative and, you know, that alarm goes off, the amygdala section of our brain kind of does that whole alarm system for good reason. It's for self-protection. So of course, if you're walking down a dark alley in Melbourne, you know, late at night, you know, you want that alarm to go off if, you know, if you're feeling like, you know, there's a reason for it. And so what that causes is what they call the freeze, fight and flight pattern. And so we are inclined to do that. But what we're doing with this, particularly in resilience and our mindset, is being really mindful of the fact that when that lights up and that negative voice comes in our head and plays those soundtracks over and over again, being mindful and questioning them and really looking at, you know, hang on a minute, is that a soundtrack I really need to play, or is that just a habit? So in your workbook, you do have a section there to have a look at about what are some of those, you know, tracks that you keep playing that perhaps you need to embed a new soundtrack other than that. And that will help you to build that more positive mindset. Oh gosh, we've got so much that we're giving you this month. I'm really quite excited. So there is this as well, which is our above the line and below the line thinking exercise. It's more of a printout. So I'm just going to pick it up here. You've got it on the screen, but you're able to print out your own like this and laminate it. We've got that on the module for you to do. I wanted to give you a little bit of understanding around it. So above and below the line thinking is about having choice. So if you think of that black line as when stuff happens, you can kind of dip below that line and choose some of those things like judgment and feeling stuck and making excuses and procrastinating and feeling like everything's a failure. Or you can take the corresponding one, and it's kind of done in colors for that reason, and look at what are some of the above the line thinking that I can do on this. So above the line meaning choices that we make. So we say that it's at choice or at cause. And when you're below the line, we say that it's at effect, or it's like everything is affecting or is impacting on me. So this is a really helpful tool, and I have used it in countless organizations. I've used it in one-on-one conversations with people to help them to see that there's a different way of responding to things, in team reminders, for instance. And, you know, even in one of the organizations that I worked in a little while ago to do a culture piece, when I went back and had a chat with the manager months later, there was a bit of an altercation happening in the hallway. This was the outdoor staff of the council. And so we're in one of those kind of outdoorsy shed type buildings. Anyway, there was this bit of altercation in the hallway, and it wasn't so much an altercation, it was just kind of negative, you know, talk, and they were complaining about things and stuff. And the manager I was meeting with was in this room with me, and he just wheeled his chair over to the doorway, which was open. He stuck his head out the doorway and he said, "Hey, guys, bring it above the line, eh?" And I went, oh gosh, you know, that was the lessons that we had given them months before, but they had this poster up on the wall in the hallway, and he was reminding them that it's as simple as that, just being reminded that there are other ways of thinking on things. So when we get to looking at what causes our resilience buckets to sort of, you know, drop down and to empty, one of the other things we do need to look at is stress. And, you know, we often have a very, I suppose, worrying or negative view of stress. There is, you know, different ways of looking at stress, but it's one of those things that will happen in our life at various points. It's something you can't avoid. It's just part of life. So the most important thing around managing stress is recognizing the symptoms. And then once you've recognized those symptoms, identify what are the triggers, what are the things that are linked to those symptoms that are causing that. And then when you look at those things, what things can we change to reduce that impact? And finally, what other things can we put in place to help mitigate that, or, you know, reduce the stress by the way we deal with our own self-care? And I'm sure you know all of this already, but there's quite a number of things on that slide there that talks about, you know, meditating and a good night's sleep, drinking water, being kind, listening to music. Those kind of things can help us just, you know, let the stress levels go down and sort of reset, if you like. There's a little bit of work in the workbook around that. There's also a video on our online platform around stress, and a different way of looking at stress. Instead of thinking that, oh gosh, I'm stressed, turning stress into something that can help us put these things in place and help us with our energy levels. So I encourage you to have a look at that as well, and be mindful that we all go through stressful periods and it is part of life. So what I want to do now, after looking at resilience, looking at stress, looking at the things that chip away from our positiveness, if you like, and chip away at our resilience muscle, I want to take you through a little bit around one of the things that people sometimes struggle with around resilience. And one of the things that, or the reasons, if you like, why we need to have a strong resilience muscle, and it's important to build that. And that is because we also need to make sure we build our personal agility for survival these days. And what I mean by that is having a really proactive approach to change. Personal agility is an emotional intelligence competency or skill, and it is one that you'll probably work on a bit with your coach as you're doing that, particularly if that's something that comes up in your assessment that you need a little bit more help with. It's something that we all need to build muscle in, and it's so important. And also as a change champion, and I know that's a self-made name, but it's, you know, for me, that I've been through so many changes in life, I've learnt the importance of having that agility muscle and keeping that strong and being able to leap, being able to willing, able and ready to look at what's the next opportunities and what we can do, because life changes a lot. So let's look at what it is. As I said before, it is a really crucial emotional intelligence skill. It's firstly about acknowledging that we do live in a world of constant change. And so that's a given. And so instead of going, oh my gosh, here comes another change, it's being proactive towards that change. It's about accepting some of those challenges we talked about in the past, like in the previous slides, accepting some of those challenges as learnings, as things that are different. It's a bit of a change and it's going to be, you know, take me out of my comfort zone, but, you know, I'm going to take a learning from it. So it's being willing to do that, willing to do something different or make a change. It's also about exploring opportunities. So sometimes we get in a spot where you just feel stuck, and sometimes we think that there's no choices. So it's about exploring more opportunities, because generally you'll find there are other choices, there are other ways of going around doing things. So that's being proactive around making those changes. And of course, like I said before, it's about being willing to rapidly and effectively adapt to the changes that sometimes we don't preempt or initiate the change ourselves. Often it's changes that happen that we're having to adapt to. And I really like Charles Darwin's quote here, and you have a copy of this as well. It's also in the printable quotes if you want to print that out as well and put it up on your wall. And it is, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, or even the most intelligent, but the ones that are most responsive to change. Now, you might sort of say, well, you know, why is that important? Like, why is building personal agility important? And I think my easiest way of explaining that is that absolutely nothing grows in the comfort zone area, and nothing changes in that area. And if we have same traditions and entrenched routines and things, it doesn't bring about any improvements or positive change. It's like that definition of madness is kind of, you know, wanting to have change and expecting change, but doing things the same old way. It's just not going to happen. So if you think about it, you are not the same person that you were last year. You're not the same person that you were last week or even yesterday, because we keep evolving through every experience that we have. And the more experiences we have, the more we learn to evolve and the more we grow. And the broader our thinking becomes and the wiser we become. So, you know, it's important to look at the fact that agility is just that ability to go with the changes, to jump on the changes, because stuff will happen and things will change. And it changes now faster more than any other decades. And I think we need to accept that rather than be pushing back against it. You know, option one basically is not always available, and you have to be willing to explore other options. You've got to be willing to look at, you know, what else is out there when one door closes, for instance, or one way that you're going to do things doesn't work out. It doesn't mean it's the end of the line. It just means it's more of a zigzag path. And it is about survival. It's being about, you know, having the ability to respond and adapt early to change so you have more of a chance of surviving. I absolutely love zigzags. Now, you already know that I love stripes, but I absolutely love zigzags. And what I mean by that is I've had to ride those zigzags a lot in my life. And, you know, they're just really bumps in the road that require you to sometimes go sideways a little, or go up and down, or sometimes even go around the hurdles. I mentioned in my last webinar, I think it was, that I've lived in 10 different locations or regions. I think it's 14 or 15 different houses. I've had 3 different partners, 2 marriages. I got the 3rd one right, actually, and my partner Gary, who runs this with me, we are truly, you know, equal partners around that, and it's wonderful. But both of us have raised 2 children each, and they're all independent adults with successful careers, and they're spread from London to Victoria to Brisbane. Also, personally, shout out to the people in Barkey, the councillors in Barkey, and some of them in Toowoomba and some of them on the Sunshine Coast. In a past life, I was a hairdresser. So I've had 3 careers. I've been a hairdresser. I've been in public sector management roles, leadership consultant and coach. And I'm building now more broadly into author, speaking and advocate for gender equality. So there are new opportunities that come along in each chapters. And I'm richer for all of those changes. I'm wiser, I'm clearer in purpose. I'm not perfect, I'm still learning and I'm still growing, but I've become more broader in my thinking and more strategic. It's made me much more adaptable and easier to join the dots and to understand the big picture. Now, these days, that broader perspective is really required in leadership capability. Great leaders are responsive, courageous, zigzaggers. They don't stick their head in the sand, and they respond decisively and for the greater good of the people that they lead. And if you just want a quick comparison for that, you only have to look at how different leaders actually dealt with the whole COVID-19 thing. It is important to be able to adapt quickly to change. So one of the things I want to share with you today is the 3 things. And this is from personal experience, the 3 things that I know from personal experience about change. The first one is it's not scary. It's not as scary as you think it might be. The second one is it's not complicated, or we don't need to make it complicated. And the third one is the importance around that this agility, if you like, or ability to change is a mindset. So let's have a quick look at that. Firstly, when I say change is not scary, what I mean by that is when you weigh it all up, not changing is far, far scarier, particularly in this world. And for me, stuck is not an option. It means being stagnant. It means not growing. It means being held back. It means being left behind. And it means, as I get older in the stage I am in life, it means at risk of being obsolete or redundant. So when I feel stuck, I immediately start looking for change. I immediately start exploring the what next options, if you like. Now, I know that not everyone's like that, and a lot of people fear change because they have this fear of failure. And I know I keep saying next month, but we're doing more around what are some of these fears that hold us back from being courageous youth. So we'll do more of that in module 4, actually. But this is one of them. One of the 5 top fears that we have that holds us back is the fear of failure. And that's about mistakes and losses versus learning and gains that we could have from making the change, from doing it. And I often do this in my coaching when I look at, you know, hang on, let's have a look at this thing. Remember the line, you know, the cause and effect line that we talked about before? So when you're looking at a change coming in or what we need to make a change, I get them to put their hands out and we have a look at, okay, let's look at if we went this way, what does that look like? What's going to happen? What's the impact? What does it look like in a year's time? You know, how is that going to impact on your resilience levels and, you know, your enthusiasm to keep going and all those things. And then we look at, on the other hand, well, what's it like, you know, if it works out really well, what's it going to lead us to, like what's some of the other opportunities that will come with that. So we kind of really look at what are the good things and what are the not so good things and weigh it up. And when you weigh it up, I will say that 9 times out of 10, not making the change is actually far worse than making the change and going on the flow of growing with it. So it's really important to question this fear of failure, because there is no such thing as failure, as the slide says. It's just an indication that life is trying to put us or push us towards, or nudge us, if you like, towards a new direction. And this is a quote that it's an adaptation of a quote from Oprah Winfrey. It's one of my favorites, but I think it's a really good way to look at failure. If you keep thinking, oh, but what if I fail? Keep saying to yourself, hang on a minute, this is just an indication. Even if it doesn't work out well, it's an indication that I need to tweak it. I need to move in another direction. So when it comes to making changes, my mum, dear old mum, she's 98, still around. She used to say to me, good things come to those who wait, Jalinda. And also, you know, slow down, you know, don't get too big for your boots, you know, don't be too out there, too loud, all of this kind of, you know, just be, you know, don't do things quickly. And what I discovered was actually great things happen to those who don't wait. Because one thing that I know for sure is that changes that don't work out are more likely to happen too slowly or too late. So when I sort of look at that, I think of a quote about sitting alongside a river. And, you know, you can have, the quote goes something like, you have to sit a long time beside a river before a roast duck will just miraculously fly into your mouth. And the meaning of that is that, you know, if you want a roast duck meal, you've got to do the work, and you've actually got to be able to move forward on that. So doing things, you know, not too slowly. I know that numerous times in my life that I've sat on a great idea. You know, I had a great idea, I sat on it, I spent too long trying to perfect it, trying to be ready for it. And then what do you know, somebody else releases it before you or has that same idea, and suddenly you're not actually leading the way in this, you're following or looking like you're copying someone else. So it's really important to look at, don't wait too long, make the changes, because often when changes don't work out, it's because they've been done too slowly or too late. One of the things about not changing and a scary thing is when you see some of the things that we're sitting in the moment in relation to women's issues. This just blows my mind that women over 55 are the fastest growing homeless sector that we have in Australia. And the thing that blows my mind even more is in the last 5 years, this has increased by 63%. So when you look at what causes that, then, like, that's just not acceptable in anyone's terms, and we need to do something about it, right? So there's a change that needs to happen here. But when you look at what causes this, we look at, you know, how this happens, how people become homeless overnight. Quite often these older women, they're homeless for the first times in their life, you know, in their later years. And it's just simple things that happen, simple changes, like they've become single, they're now living alone, maybe they've lost a partner, they're renting and they've been evicted, you know, they've got economic disadvantage, perhaps there's been some family or domestic violence, you know, lower levels of career progression over many years, perhaps lower levels of education and not kind of, you know, topping up their, you know, their skill levels. And then all it takes is an unexpected crisis to come along, one little thing, one of those little tiny adversities on top of all of that. And suddenly, you know, like a loss of job or an illness, suddenly, you know, they find themselves in this situation. So there are lots of things we need to do around that whole gender pay gap and gendered family caring roles and all the other things that we've actually been accepting for many years. And this is now the outcomes that we're seeing, and it's not acceptable. So this is one of those things that it's far scarier if we don't change this than if we actually really proactively make some changes around it. I want to take you through why I think change is not complicated or doesn't have to be. And really the points are on the slide. It's unnecessary to overcomplicate it. Sometimes we turn change, you know, that we talked about before, catastrophizing things. Sometimes we turn change into this massive thing, and it doesn't need to be massive. We don't need to overcomplicate it. We often don't need to overanalyze it. And sometimes we try to find all the bits and get all the ducks in a row first perfecting everything, constantly researching what's the right idea, but we then overanalyze it and then sort of, paralysis by analysis. We don't have to try and have everything lining up in a row. Like I just said, we don't actually need to make it bigger than it is, and we don't need to wait for the perfect timing, because all of these things is just simply procrastination. So if you really call out some of that behavior and go, hang on a minute, I don't want to be procrastinating here, we do actually need to do something in a more timely manner. One of the things about not making it complicated is about learning to take one step at a time. Now, in taking one step at a time, firstly, we need to decide, what is that first step? And sometimes those smaller steps in the right direction can bring around very big changes in the end. The saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah. So if you can just do that one bite at a time, it's amazing how that can kind of morph into other things, and the change can be, what we want it to be, but we don't actually need to see what that's going to be, like this slide says. You just need to take the first step towards deciding, that you don't want to be where you are currently, or you don't want to be, doing the things you're currently doing. You don't want to do it in the same way. We need to make some changes. So just one little step is always good. I was married at 21, religious family. It was never going to be accepted to be, living in sin or having a child before marriage, etc. So the general thing that happened in my family, and all of the people I was surrounded with, was, the girls got married early. By the mid-30s, I knew my marriage was over. There was just kind of, nothing there. And so I had just recently moved from out west to the Sunshine Coast with my husband. And we'd built this bigger house, and we had this massive mortgage, and I just felt stuck. So the first thing I decided to do was, I had previously sold salons, but in the previous location before we moved to the Sunshine Coast. My first step was, I wasn't going to buy another salon or go into another salon. My first step was to go to uni, to get a degree, to change my career so I could be more financially independent. And so that's what I did. My second step was a bit of a crisis, and that was that I had a degeneration shoulder injury from all the holding my arms up in the air for 20 years of hairdressing. So I had surgery, and the rehabilitation plan placed me in a new job, a new career in line with what I was learning at uni. So that was my step into a temporary role in government. My third step was, within 2 years, I won a permanent position as a district manager, and I was offered a transfer 1,300 kilometres away. And so I took the transfer and I filed for divorce. So the fourth step, a few years later, was I then was promoted to regional manager, moved again to a different region, and happened to meet my Mr. Wonderful, as I call him, Gary. So when I'm just using that as an example, these are baby steps. There's steps, some of them are larger steps, but they're steps on the way to, I didn't see what was coming around the corner. I didn't see what was at the top of the step. So I encourage you to just take that first step and be open to where it will lead you, because along the way, there will be choices. The other thing around keeping things simple and not overcomplicated is this process. And this is a simple focused, a simple model, if you like. It's not my model, but it's a model that talks about how to keep things simple and how to have a simple solution. And the main thing around that, you can see it on the slide, is that your solutions, you're focused on the solution, not the problem, rather, and also that in between, what that means is you're open to the in-between area of not actually having everything worked out, and that the action that you're doing is more of an interaction with others around exploring what that in-between is, rather than looking at an individual problem. So focusing on the issue, the thing, the exploration around that, and doing that in an interactive way, and understanding that this may be just an in-between or an interim option. Focusing on what's there, not what's not. Focusing on the possibilities, so that's the exploration, and drawing those possibilities from the past, the present, and the future. And then also making sure the language that we use around change and around solutions is actually simple, clear and concise. Don't overcomplicate it. Also understanding that when you have, a problem and you're wanting to come up with a solution, every case and everything is different. So don't be tempted to put in ill-fitting theories or a cookie cutter approach or off-the-shelf decisions or solutions to, to the problem. So keeping it simple basically is keeping it within those parameters, and you can chunk down a problem into coming up with a really great solution. The last one is that agility is a mindset. And I think you already know that from a lot of the stuff that I've shared already, and also from the stuff that's in your workbook. But it is actually about an attitude or a mindset, and it leads to taking courageous actions. So it's about the curiosity to explore. And I love this from Albert Einstein. I love a lot of his quotes, but I love this. He's saying, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. And the important thing is to not stop questioning. So when we come from a place of curiosity, we're not in a place of judgment or blame or problem focused or hopeless acceptance of stuff, because all of those are below the line choices. When we come from a place of asking questions, then we are willing to explore the what next and what else. And that's an important place to be in. Great leaders ask questions. They know they don't have all the answers within them, and they keep exploring that what if. It's also about having the courage to experience things. Building courage is, I love this, if plan A doesn't work, you got 25 more letters in the alphabet. So, stay cool, find another process or find another option. Another way of looking at it is saying that option A is not always available. And sometimes option A that we've been going along nicely with is suddenly taken away from us. I do a lot of work with Lean In, and Sheryl Sandberg, who started the Lean In organisation, she lost her husband, Dave, at the age of 49 after a massive stroke on a treadmill. They had 2 primary age children at that time. And she writes in her book, Option B, she writes about the heartbreaking experience in quite raw honesty. And the tagline of the book is facing adversity, building resilience and finding joy. And I have got that book in your book list or your reading list on this month's module. But Sheryl tells of a time a few weeks after losing Dave, they had to go to a school function. It was supposed to be a father and daughter function. And in the depths of not wanting to go on and not wanting to go to the function, not wanting to go to that without him, a good friend of hers sat down with her and said, you know what, Sheryl, you need to realise that option A is not available. So let's just kick the shit out of option B. And it was a wake-up call for her to feel that, I needed to realise that it's no good sitting around going, woe is me, I now don't have option A and I want option A. If option A is not available, you have to look for option B. And it takes courage to rise up from adversity, to rebuild, reset, and experience that next new chapter. So I highly recommend that book if you're going through some of that adversity yourself, or you feel that you really need a push to look at what are some of the other options. Now, I'm mindful of the time, so I'll just take you through the last one here on grit. We've included a section on grit. Grit seems to be this buzzword at the moment. When you talk about resilience, you tend to talk about grit. And it comes from a best-selling book from Angela Duckworth called Grit, another one that I recommend in your reading list. So again, grit's got nothing to do with cement or hardening up or being less emotional, like I said earlier, because emotions are not a weakness that need to be shut down. Her formula is passion plus persistence or perseverance equals grit. And what she's saying there is it takes passion. And if you think about it, our passion is driven by our emotions. So we need to have that emotional awareness, the passion to drive us, and that persistence, if you like, or that conviction to keep going. Now, if you remember from the first module, there was the red circle with the other circles in it, where we talked about what we need at our core to be who we are. That's where conviction sits. It is actually that it's fueled by that intersection of heart, which is feelings and passion, and your gut, which is your experiences, your intuition, your purpose, and all that stuff that you get from actually riding the zigzags and saying yes to the challenges. So that's where we get our grittiness from. There's a self-reflective, a self-assessment grit exercise in your workbook. I suggest you do that. It's got a bit of a twist to it where you look at, how much is it that passion that drives you? How much is it, your perseverance, if you like, or persistence that drives you? And what is that mix? So again, I recommend that we look at that because it's another way of looking at what is persistent made up, what is resilience made up of? And it is about, understanding the grit and what drives that grit in us. So just recapping on those three things, these are personal lessons that I've shared with you. I know that change is not scary and that changing or not changing is far scarier. I know that when I tend to, and Gary will vouch for this, overcomplicate things or overthink things, that is not a good way to make change happen or to build your resilience muscle. And I also know that it's so important to have an agile mindset in today's day and age. And, always, I've had it all my life and I'm in my 50s. So actually being curious enough to have the courage to make those changes and actually to do that conviction that's needed to push for change and to challenge for change. So personal agility is an EQ competence, and you will learn more about this next month when you look at your, we'll go through what emotional intelligence is, and you'll go through some of these with your coach. The report that you get from the assessment that you do will also show you things like people that are high in this, that have got high levels of personal agility, sound like this. They manage their situations with more ease and the transitions within those situations with more ease. And, they tend to examine the situations from a broader perspective. They understand that there's a need for change and anticipate it. They tend to be a bit more strategic in their thinking and they embrace change, more flexible and willing to learn from experiences. People who don't have much personal agility and are lower in this, they tend to do the opposite of that, I suppose, is the easiest way of putting it. They tend to actually, deny or ignore that change exists or resist change in a lot of ways. And there is a how agile are you self-assessment exercise in the workbook as well. So I won't go into that further because you will find it there. One thing I do want to say to you, though, is that it is really important to look at what ties you up. What are the things around agility that tend to sort of stop you in your tracks, if you like. And this is a process, if you like, that when we need to have changes or when we're going through crisis, when we're going through phases of change, if you like, this is a natural progression that we have. We have that natural denial to start with. There may be some anger that comes up. There'll be a bit of resistance. There may be a lot of resistance before we get to the acceptance. So the actual measure of your personal agility will be in how fast you progress from denial to acceptance, to leaping towards those new opportunities. So it's really important to have a look at that as well. And we do also have that in your workbook. Have a good think about how fast do you progress through this normal sort of process to get to that, acceptance level where then you are open to exploring, asking questions and the new opportunities. Just to close this section off, I want you to think about your life in chapters. This has actually held me in good stead, and I think you've heard me say it before. I see every phase in life as a new chapter. So you kind of just turn that page and start the new chapter, but you bring some of the learnings you've had from the other things, and then you've got this, every chapter that has a story and a lesson and a purpose. And, even the current chapter, the COVID and the recovery chapter, I believe has a purpose. I believe that it is a major, it's a catalyst, if you like, for major change. And I think it'd be a total shame if we miss some of the opportunities to drive changes from what we've just been through. Like, for example, we're seeing significant changes happening already in workplaces around how flexible we can work and working hours and working from home and all that kind of thing. So I think when we look at this and chapters, it's really looking at, you know, how agile can we be, and is it time to sort of start a new chapter? Is it time to sort of, you know, become stronger and wiser from the things that happened in the last chapter, bring some of that with us, and then look at the what's next, and be willing to start that new chapter. I think what changes that you can make and build and keep your resilient level strong is probably a really good thing to take away from today's webinar, and also from the module that you're going to be doing this month with Resilient You. Just again, it's self-reflection, looking at what are some of those changes that will help you to be more agile and ready and able to leap on opportunities and keep that resilience muscle strong. So this month we do have, as I said, you know, quite a bit on. In the module, there is mindset awareness, there's the managing stress, there's personal agility, there's a little exercise on reality perspective, and there's some stuff on grit. You'll also be sent in the middle of the month your SEEP online assessment, and there's a live panel coming up on Friday the 19th with 3 awesome counsellors, and you'll see a little thing on that on the online platform and a link to join it. And then we're also adding this month and every month on the 4th Monday of each month, an online forum where I get to sort of, you know, well, not just me, but we all get to chat with each other, see each other, and start building some more relationships. I'm there to answer questions. So, you know, it'll be a more casual approach, and I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy that. So, Gary, I'm ready for some questions. Do we have any questions?
No questions yet, but Cheryl Gateke, I hope I got that right. Hi, Cheryl, you've got your hand up. If you're willing, I'll allow you to talk if you like, if you're happy to do that. I'll just unmute you.
Hi, Cheryl, how are you going? You're not unmuted yet.
Maybe not. Anyway, if you, we don't have any sort of questions yet about that.
It's okay. If you've got a couple of questions, we've got probably just a couple of moments for you to write those in, and I'm happy to answer any of those. I'm very aware that we have a lot on this month, as I said earlier. And so, you know, for those of you that are looking at being involved in other things, there's lots of things happening around International Women's Day and Queensland Women's Week. One of the things that excited me very early in the piece was the international theme for International Women's Day, which is Choose to Challenge. And I've also included in your quote printouts this one that's up on the screen at the moment, which is, you know, you can't spell challenge without change, which is why I took you through the process today of talking both resilience and on the need to really build that agility muscle and be willing to make changes. And I love this because it says if you're going to rise to the challenge, you have to be prepared to change. And that's the reason I've linked that together. So I hope you've really enjoyed this webinar. I know it was, you know, I tend to talk fast sometimes when I get excited, and I hope you got enough out of the key points to be able to dive into your workbook now and really enjoy doing some of that self-reflective exercise. And don't forget, when you pop online to do your stuff and to download the workbook stuff and to watch the video, it's a couple of videos on there, and to interact and answer some of the questions. What we would like you to do at the end of each section is to press that complete button so that we can see that you're progressing. That just helps us to know who needs help out there, who do we need to give a little nudge to, and please feel free to ask us any questions so that we can help you on this journey of 8 months.
Jalinda, just one quick thing. I do have a question from Natalia Muscat from Gladstone. The question is, considering that this program is for women, is it fair to assume that males already know this? And I'll first of all answer that question for you, Natalia. No, males do not know this. But Jalinda, you might want to comment.
Oh gosh, I love that you answered it, Gary, and I'm thinking the same thing. No, males don't know this. We're doing this program for women, not because women need fixing, and I think I said that right at the start. It's because this particular program came under a particular bucket of money that is for a women's initiative stuff, and so we're doing it for women. But oh my gosh, I work with men and women in the leadership space, and a lot of men need this. I'm going to say it, Gary. A lot of men that are stuck in positions that have been there a long time in what I call seat warming need this more than the women do. The other thing I would put on that is also women go through a lot of changes in our life. We're actually needing to rise up and build our resilience levels, constantly in our life, and it can be to do with having children, or even if we don't have children, we go through, the monthly stuff that happens. We go through a whole heap of other things at the end of that with, the changes that happen with our bodies, with menopause. We just go through a lot of changes and a lot of adjustments and adaptability. And so, yeah, my short answer is men probably sometimes need this more than the women do.
Agreed, absolutely agreed. Just one final thing before we wrap up, Jalinda, I'll just share the results of that poll
that
we did earlier on, which should be up on everyone's sort of screens now. It's almost a mirror reverse of strongest and weakest, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think one of the lowest scoring ones for strongest is emotional intelligence, and it's also one of the weakest ones, I suppose, which I think is really fortunate, because this is very much what this program is focused on, is that social and emotional intelligence. So hopefully everybody, if we see that as a need, obviously for a lot of the participants, this is going to be a very valuable program to be a part of.
What I also love there with the strengths is that you've taken some good things, and I'm not going to take all the credit for it, but we've just been focusing last month on your purpose, your values, your strengths. And I'm hoping you've been able to build a bit more strength or around those, a clarity around those that hold you in good stead. We have planned this program to start with that, because that helps us with our resilience. So it all comes back to that. So I'm really pleased to see that that's where the strengths are at the moment. And as we do more in the emotional intelligence space, that will rise as well. So this is really great. Thank you so much for filling out that poll. We just wanted to give that a go. Any other questions, Gary?
No other questions. Natalia was actually quite happy with that answer, so I'm glad we got it right there.
One of the wonderful things about what I'm doing at the moment, and I'm going to just paraphrase that or fix that, what we are doing at the moment, is that Gary and I do our work together. And while I tend to be more comfortable presenting and content and the coaching around leadership, Gary's had massive experience in leadership within councils, outside of councils, not-for-profits, and has actually seen what happens when you don't have enough diversity at the leadership table, and the difference at times it is between, and I'm just saying in general here, not every woman, not every man, but when you have kind of too much of the same kind of leadership in one place, you don't end up with change. You'll end up with a lot more change, questioning, curiously exploring things when you have more diversity at the table. So that's something we both know and we're both passionate about. So thank you so much for that question. I think we'll wrap it up now, Gary, if that's it. And I have gone slightly over time by 5 minutes. I think we started about 5 minutes late anyway. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed that. Please hop onto the interactive sessions we have. I know you're going to love the panel that we're having with Mayor Jenny Hill, let me see if I can get this right, Mayor Jane McNamara, and Councillor, I've just had a blank.
Lisa Bradley.
That's it, Lisa Bradley from Logan. So, that'll be really fun, but it'll also, I'm talking less, I'm asking a couple of questions, I'm getting them to share their stories of resilience. And I know that you'll get a lot out of that as experienced councillors and councillors that have been through some challenges. So until then, have an awesome month. Enjoy Queensland Women's Week and International Women's Day, whatever you're involved in. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.